these are instances where, these things didn't have to happen. And we kind of thought that they had been ironed out in the seasons where he wasn't being put under pressure. But as soon as he is now put under pressure, he reverts back to that. Again, it's not a big thing. It's not costing him a world championship this season, but at some point it could. And that is where I think is the only little flaw that we
I
have
will push
for
back on that
Max.
quickly, and we don't have to go
Hit
into
me.
this in depth, but
Yeah, hit me, hit me.
this is a bit of a biased perspective to classify that as a flaw. Nothing like you pooping all over my Ferrari party, even on a day, 2 weeks now, back to back, where my guys are winning and winning great, and my team is up there on the podium 2 weeks in a row. You find a way to ruin my party again. Welcome back, Shez. You're back. You're back and better than ever. You're here to rein in on my parade.
What are you talking about? I think Ferrari are doing a classic undercover title assault. Undercover. If they win it, everyone's going to be like, "Where the heck did they come from?"
Well, and we'll have Max and Lando to thank for that, right? But hey, look, I know what's the topic of the day today, but again, I don't want to bury the lead 2 weeks in a row, 2 race weekends in a row, where we have seen Ferrari do something that is really unlike Ferrari. I mean, to be honest, I'm only starting to get my hopes high for Brazil next weekend, but I probably shouldn't do that. But hey, look, I just want to give a shout out to Carlos for putting a brilliant race together, and this might, by the looks of it, sound like his final win, especially if Charles has a fighting shot moving forward. I don't know, they could be a swaparoo in place, it sounds like, but what a brilliant race, right? To lead. Well, he didn't quite lead for the first couple laps, so that probably was the best thing to do, is to just sort of hang back and wait for the right moment. But if this is the way he ends his Ferrari tenure, in terms of being on the top step of the podium, I think that was a heck of a race for him. What do you think?
Yeah, great, brilliant pole position twice, brilliant race performance. I thought he handled Max exactly how he needed to handle him. Um, and yeah, it was good. Really, 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 really good. Um,
So it's fair to say that if Lewis has success next year, that we'll have to thank Carlos in some way, shape, or form, right?
why? Why?
I know, I'm just kidding. That's a topic for another day. But I do want to kind of put this in our to ponder file, right? Have Ferrari done the right thing by getting rid of Carlos at seemingly the right time? We'll come back to it on another day. But today's the day for you to tell me how loud wrong I was in defending Max when you and I had this sort of infamous debate on flaws and all.
And you are going to be super surprised because that's not what I'm going to do.
I'm happy to
I
be loud wrong today. I'm in such a good mood. You tell me if I'm wrong, I'll take it.
Yeah, but you shouldn't. Look, I I watched the race in Mexico. It was again super controversial, and this time the decision went against Max. There was that turn seven incident that I found very, very difficult to not difficult to watch, but it was just rude. Like he didn't need to do that, and you could tell that the only reason he did it was because it felt like retribution. It was just silly. Um, I want to recap a little bit because we should talk
Yeah,
about
let's
how
start
we
there
got
first. Yeah.
to how we got to that. So uh, Max is ahead of Lando on lap what 2, 3.
Mhm.
Sainz gets ahead of Max. Lando then has a run into turn 4 and again goes round the outside of him. But this time, unlike in Austin, he reaches the apex first. Max is therefore, by the letter of the guidelines, obliged to give Lando some racing room on the exit. He fails to do so, and you can tell that because he puts it on the white line. Lando then has to take evading action. He overtakes both Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen. He lets Carlos back through as he's supposed to do, but he then takes up position ahead of Max. Max then takes a run at Lando outbrakes himself massively into turn 7, 8, which is not an overtaking spot, goes off himself, and Lando, in taking evading action, also goes off the track. So subsequently, we get a 10-second penalty, which is the prescribed penalty for uh, a move like
Right.
the turn 4 incident.
Mhm.
He then gets another 10-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage, which is what happened at turn 7, ultimately getting a 20-second overall penalty.
Mm.
Some of the controversies in that: number one, why is it that in Austin, Lando only got a 5-second penalty, and in Mexico,
Max got a 10.
Max got a 10-second penalty? Well, the steward said that the reason, in fact, they said it in Austin, the reason that Lando got a 5-second penalty and not a 10-second penalty, which is the correct penalty to get for what Lando did in Austin, but the reason he didn't was because Max was also off the track and was adjudged to have not given Lando enough space. I.e., he pushed Lando
Oh, wow.
off the track, and therefore, to mitigate that, Lando only received a 5-second penalty when he should have got a 10-second penalty. But in Mexico, none of those mitigating circumstances were needed, and therefore Max got a 10-second penalty for both of the maneuvers that he made, and therefore he got a 20-second penalty. So since then, what has happened is there has been a massive outcry on social media. One, that there's British bias, which I have to say I don't really understand,
Today?
because Lando did get a 5-second penalty in Austin, and as far as I remember, Lando is British, and the driver steward in Austin was Derek Warwick, who is also British.
You know what?
So I didn't understand that one. And the rules were applied exactly the same way in Mexico. But again, British bias was brought into it. But it infuriates me when I hear it. And I have to say, I do get it. I do understand why, when Martin Brundle and then Johnny Herbert and then Damon Hill and all of those guys all pile in. Lewis Hamilton, I think, even mentioned that he saw a plume of dust ahead of him and said, "I know who that is." So everyone from my side of the pond decided to
You
pile
know,
in on Max. So I get it. I do get it. But I do think that on this occasion, Max was banged to rights. But there's probably a bigger conversation about driving standards that I want to get into. But I do want to hear what you think first.
well,
Whew.
first of all, I love that you guys, whoever has chosen to be part of this British media sort of contingent that's being perpetually accused of being biased, has decided to wear this issue on your sleeve, because that's amazing. I mean, I have never accused British bias to be percolating in terms of how the FIA makes decisions there, but there you go. I mean, now we have two of them. I think there's a difference between how coverage is made of a race weekend versus that. My criticism has always been towards the coverage, not so much the on track operations and outcomes and whatnot. But there you go. Anyway,
That wasn't aimed directly at you, Omar.
no,
It
I
was
get it.
more
No, it's
a
not.
commentary of what
I
I've seen on social
well, but
media,
I
and
think this
it just
is
makes just makes a very polarized. It just makes a slightly
yeah.
contradictory view. That on the one hand, how could Lando not have got a penalty in Austin, and then by the same token, why is Max getting a penalty
Yeah.
here? And that's what I'm hearing, and
But
it just
as
feels a
we
bit contradictory.
But that's just a byproduct of the fact that there is sort of inconsistent application of the rules. And
But do you think
it's
this was
not,
inconsistently
no,
applied?
I think it was consistent in that there was some consistency from last race to this race. Now, I'm sure there are people who will scream and shout because look, depending on whoever's camp you're in, and I think honestly this has nothing to do with Lando being British or not. If this were Carlos versus Max, and I mean, if Carlos was in a fighting position, that would be a different thing. So we would always be, when it's the two sort of championship contenders competing for it, I think the stakes sort of change. That's my opinion. I think it's probably exaggerated by the fact that Lando's British, but I don't think it has a whole lot to do with that. I think we should have a conversation about driving standards because it's there. But I think in terms of the adjudication, look, last week when we came on, we sort of talked about the fact that, you cannot have rules for every maneuver, for every turn, for every, sort of incident that happens. That's why you have people that sort of decide whether a rule is followed or where the integrity or the spirit of the rule has been broken or not, right? And I think this weekend, as in last weekend, the only thing you could complain about is the application in terms of how those stewards are looking at it. And the problem now
But
you have is it's
but
not.
do you think they were applied differently in the two
I don't think
situation?
they were applied differently, but look, I didn't believe that Lando deserved a penalty last week. So right, so that's sort of my take. I don't think
But
either
by the
driver.
letter of the law, he should have got a penalty, which is
Correct.
what he did.
That's fine. But then if you do letter of the law, then what you're going to get is what's happening on track does not meet the eye test or the smell test or whatever you want to say. And that in itself creates controversy. So now this is a philosophical argument of whether you want to apply the letter of the law in the way it's written versus you look at what's actually happening, reading the race, reading the drivers. I told you this before too. You cannot just say we're going to apply the rule equally to everybody because everyone drives a little bit differently. And there's a difference in tension between a standard that's set to a certain prototype of driving versus drivers don't actually operate that way. I mean, Yuki Tsunoda said it the best way, right? If you get to a point where drivers are just robotic, then it's not going to be fun. I completely agree. And therefore,
Yeah, I
you
agree with that.
cannot implement things. Equity does not mean equality, right? And vice versa. You have to look at so honestly, I disagreed with the way last weekend went because I thought that neither driver deserved a penalty there. This weekend, I think Max was just reckless. Period. I mean, there's no way to defend that. I mean, we can debate.
Well, Max was definitely reckless in that 7-8 thing, but I feel like he got the red mist because he'd been overtaken by Lando and Lando didn't want to give the position back. But
Correct.
also, I feel like he was being a little bit calculating because he figured that if I get ahead of Lando and I'm in a slower car, so if I hold him up for like 8-10 laps until they
So
give
I
me
think
my penalties, then it stops him from getting ahead of the Ferraris,
so.
which I
That's what
think
we
was a
need to
very
talk about.
clever way of doing it.
That's what we need to talk about. We can come back to that, Shez. But the idea again to just sort of get it back to the refereeing of things, the adjudication of the rules. I think that, look, there's probably going to be revisions in a couple of races. It sounds like everyone but Max is agreeable to that.
What a surprise.
But I would also be cautious in that those rules by itself will not solve all the problems, and in fact, they
Yeah.
will probably lead to new ones, right?
Yeah.
This is why you need consistent refereeing to be there. You need the same group of
Thank
guys
you.
or girls
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
people to kind of be there, at least if not every race, but at least maybe it's broken up into two phases or something like that. There's a
But I
better.
mean, to be fair, it always seems to be Johnny Herbert and Derek Warwick. Like they just seem
Well,
to
and
swap every race.
yeah, and I don't know that that's either look again. I think the fact that you don't have consistent refereeing then opens up the door to all of these aspersions, right? Do you have bias refereeing? Do you they get don't get paid anything? Like, I mean that sounds a pretty ridiculous thing for a sport that's multi-billion dollars. Like that's just I'm sorry to say it's stupid. It just really is. So, but I also think the FIA and Formula One to a great extent have an appetite for having this sort of tasty,
Okay.
sort of yeah.
Look,
So
look, I'll tell you where my take is on this, right? And I don't think it's coincidence that it's always the same driver that seems to be involved in this. I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing either. I think it's up to the teams and the drivers to always push the rules, and Max does that brilliantly. But it does seem that it's always him that this is in conjunction with, right? We went through a really long period of time where the drivers kind of regulated themselves. You didn't need rules like this because throughout the mid noughties and the Alonso, Raikkonen, Hamilton, Button, Rosberg era, essentially, you didn't need to have these rules because the drivers had unwritten rules between themselves, codes of conduct that meant that you can call me soft for that, but I don't think it was. The drivers still wanted to win, but there was a way of going about that overtake that involved a bit of nuance, a bit of
Yeah.
working that move a few corners in advance, and I enjoyed that. I really did. I think that was the
But
best form of overtaking that we had. Max came on the scene 2015, 2016, and he changed the rules of engagement. And almost from the day he came on the scene, the rules needed to start being changed. That's why we had the Max Verstappen rule in 2016 after the late moves in the braking zone that he had with Raikkonen and Vettel. And then again, after 2021, we had to have a new set of rules to dictate the apex. And what that's meant is that rather than moves being planned a few corners in advance in a car that has more pace but is chasing, or in a car that's defending, all that's happening is because Max has shown that all you need to do is just get to the apex first, and then you can dictate whatever happens at the apex at the exit. It means that that's what all the drivers are doing. And the rules have subtly moved towards that form of driving. The fact that they took out that little line that said that the defending driver needs to stay on track between the 2022 rules and the 2024 guidelines means that Max is even more enabled to drive the way that he has been driving. And he does it. If the rules tell him that he can drive like that, that's what he does. And the problem for me is that that's then how all the other drivers start to drive as well. So what you see is rather than getting these long played out corner after corner moves where you see a proper joust between two drivers. Instead, what you see is one driver getting to the apex, pushing his rival off, and then we wait for a few corners and a few laps before we find out what the penalty is going to be. And then we just spend the whole race and the whole post race talking about whether we think that was a penalty, whether we think the right driver got a penalty. Well, it shouldn't be about that. It should be more akin to the way sort of Lewis and Sebastian Vettel fought each other between 2017 and 2019. Those are really fun battles. We saw maybe one occurrence in Canada in 2019 where Sebastian got a penalty, but in the main it was clean racing between the two of them. I'm not saying Lewis was suddenly some kind of saint. No, he was aggressive, but it was the kind of aggression that you thought, actually, he's thought this out when he's going up against someone, whether he's attacking or defending. I just don't see that anymore. And Max has a big part to play in that, for better or worse.
So Max is a bit of an anomaly in this case, right? And so you don't change the rules. Just implement it the way that look. If what they did this weekend is going to be consistently carried out as the standard, this will take care of itself because a 20-second penalty, two license points can then be accelerated to make it even more, right? And then you kind of police it that way. I mean, it's an unusual situation, right, in terms of the championship right now where Max has the upper hand, therefore he's able to do that. I do want to say this, everything that you just said, right? We have to bear in mind that we've been calling not you necessarily or me, but the narrative around Lando Norris also needs to change with this because time and time again, there's been a lot of criticism towards him, and I think that what he has shown throughout all of the the weeks leading up to this weekend and even this weekend is he's been consistent in how he's been driving. I mean, he said exactly the same thing that you said, Shez, which is he's been trying to race fair, he's been trying to race aggressive, but he's been trying to push it to the limit, but not step over the limit. But he's been dealing with a guy who nonstop does push it way over the limit. It's not just his opinion. It evidently is the opinion of 19 other drivers, including Kevin Magnussen, which is just mind blowing to me in some way.
Unbelievable.
But there you go. It is what it is, right? So if that's the case, then the question is, what is really going on here that we need to do differently. But I would just like to add my defense of Lando. Not that I'm a big Lando Norris supporter or anything. He stayed consistent and. And generally we have sort of slayed him for that in social media and in content creation, really. But look, I mean, you're gonna get
I
this
don't,
from Max, yeah.
but I don't think this changes my Lando criticism. What I do think is that Max is such a phenomenon, right? He's incredible. Like the grid would be a much, much poorer place if Max Verstappen was not on the grid. He brings excitement, he brings quality, right? He brings a threshold, a benchmark that the drivers need to try and aspire to. I'm not taking that away from him. He is brilliant. Okay. But the fact that we have these guidelines, for me, it feels so much like it was a response to having to try and excuse why they didn't give him penalties in 2021 for some of the way that he drove. And that's then enabled him to carry on driving the way he was driving in 2021. And that's suddenly now legal. Whereas when you actually look at what happened in 2021, right, you look at Brazil turn four and you just think, well, that should not have been allowed to happen.
Yeah.
And yet it was. So they then had to create a rule and then revise that rule that makes it okay in the aftermath for them to say that that was okay at the time. And it just rolls on and on and on.
I mean, these
Where
things
he
have a cyclical nature, Chess. This is all going to come around too, right? I mean, and I think you can see it. I mean, this past weekend was just one of those where
but Amar, but my problem with it is that all of that happened because, and I hate to say it, but in 2021, F1 and the FIA just wanted a title showdown. That's what they were playing for. And anytime anyone got a little bit further ahead, whether that be Lewis or whether it be Max, because Max also got his fair share of penalties. I'm not saying that he didn't, but there was such a drive for that showdown to end in a final race denouement. Not even just that, but it had to end in a final lap denouement that we got slightly dodgy decisions in circumstances where when you looked at it you just thought there's no way that should be allowed, but it was allowed. And then you suddenly saw that, oh look, we're in a title showdown where both protagonists are coming at it with exactly the same number of points. That didn't happen by accident, but the cost of that has been that we've got these ridiculous regulations, ridiculous guidelines that have allowed us to see racing go from that nuanced planet ahead kind of way that I really enjoyed seeing F1 racing to just dive bombs and getting to the apex first with no nuance and just breaking a bit later than your rival. That's not interesting to me. I'm sorry, but as much as we are
yeah, but
having this kind of conversation and it drives more conversations from us, I would much rather be having a conversation about how good Max versus Lando was corner after
but
corner.
the reality is you wouldn't get that. And this if Max isn't doing these things, he's getting passed over very quickly. Like that's the reality of it. This is where we're at, right? I want to kind of shift to that a little bit, but I will just finally say
Yeah,
that
okay.
this is sort of woven into the fabric of modern day Formula One, where controversy is just as healthy a part of the fabric of the sport as is, the technical development and being at the pinnacle of engineering in every form that Formula One is, and driver capability and being insanely inhuman when it comes to just having these mad skills and really being able to race at breakneck speed. So I think this is really the third front of the sport today, which covets a level of excitement and demand for eyeballs on and off track. And only
Okay.
having 24 race weekends also means that the other 28 need to be filled up with something. And so this is going to be an ongoing topic. It probably will. I mean, let's see how the championship pans out. But there's either way it goes, there's going to be some discussions about this even in the off season. So
Can we just talk about what I think you wanted to talk about just a second ago, which is would it neuter the way that Max Verstappen drives if we did what I've just said and or what you said and
well,
sort of started penalizing the things that he has been getting away with up until now? Would it neuter him as a competitor?
I don't think so because I think that for a three-time world champion and for as smart and a dedicated guy that he is to the sport, he would find another way to be competitive.
I agree.
Just that
I
the rules
agree.
allow for him to do that now, and unfortunately, There's a third driver in Leclerc that's sort of not right there, right? Because this would look slightly different had he also been in the mix. And I think look, this is at this point, Shez, what we're seeing with Max, and let's just get into this, is it's a math game. And
Yeah.
I think he's driving brilliantly given the circumstances, right? It's very clear that Red Bull are the third fastest car and there's a wide gap now between where Ferrari and McLaren are at and where Red Bull are at. So the math is for Max is he's probably just on paper going to be fourth or fifth. I mean, the curious case of Oscar Piastri post the mini DRS notwithstanding, is that he should be finishing fourth behind the two McLarens and the two Ferraris. And then if Lando
So,
had
so,
the car
so
to win,
fifth, you
sorry,
mean?
even fifth. Sorry, I meant yes. Sorry, fourth or fifth. Keep it that way, right? But and if Lando can win each race, he's basically got the championship wrapped up. And I saw this weekend, as in Austin, was a perfect example of that. Max has a 47 point advantage. He had a 57 point advantage. He has nothing to lose. If they crash out of the race, every race moving forward, it's going to be golden. And unfortunately, whether we like to believe it or not, that's kind of the math for him now because his team doesn't have any solutions. It's pretty evident. Like we said, coming back from the summer break 3 races ago, whether this was going to be where the Red Bull is actually going to have something up their sleeve or not. And they don't. Maybe on a Saturday he can pull it off because pulling off one lap, it can be something that, any driver that's as superhuman as Max is, and even Charles done that in the past, where you can be brilliant on a Saturday and just not be there on a Sunday. So he is punching way above his weight in this
Yeah,
regard, but
yeah.
the reality is he doesn't have the car.
Listen. I agree with that. I think the genius of Max Verstappen in this situation is that he could so easily be completely cynical about this and just literally just shove his opponent off the road and earn himself a 1 or 2 race ban. If he did that, I think that's really putting the championship for him in jeopardy. But he never quite does that because he knows what the rules are, and he drives to those rules. I mean, if he does more of what he did turn 7 and 8, then
It's
okay, then
coming. It's coming
you
at
need to
some
start
point.
worrying.
Yeah.
But
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 Chaz,
I
you also
did.
have to read his body language, right? He says he gets asked post race whether what he thought was wrong or how he would reflect on
Oh,
it.
he knew that it was
He
wrong, didn't
completely
he?
deflected from it too, right?
Yeah,
And basically said, "Well, we
yeah,
don't have a fast enough car," and that by
yeah.
itself is an admission of, look, I'm
I'm
going to
having to
win
do
this
what I have
race
to
on
do.
paper. Yeah, so this is it. And I think it's
Yeah.
coming and we better be ready for that. Like if this keeps getting closer, right? Like let's see how this particular weekend goes, but McLaren should be favored in Brazil. It's their type of track. If Ferrari can put together some form there, you're looking at, a podiumless Max Verstappen again and probably a P4 or P5. Who knows what Mercedes bring to the table? They might show up with something. So you don't know what that looks like. And therefore, you don't know how Max is going to behave. But one thing we have seen is he doesn't mind driving his opponent, his direct championship rival, off the track.
Off
And
the road.
this was a
And
great sort of
it's
example of
yeah,
that.
I agree. It's so marked as well that like the yeah, I mean he just didn't fight Carlos in the same way that he fought Lando, and he afterwards
Yeah.
said exactly that this is I'm fighting Lando because he's my rival for the championships. I understand why he is driving like that, and I don't blame him for it. I think that this weekend was a little bit
But you
over the
do have to
line.
blame him for it a little bit. Like
Yeah, I think
let's
this
come back
weekend
to
was
that,
a
right?
little bit. Yeah, I
I
think
mean,
this
you,
weekend was over the line,
yeah,
and I still stand by the fact that the rules have enabled him, and that they have come about because they are a reaction to 2021 and a kind of retroactive. How do we make that look like it was legal? I get all of that, but those are the rules that are there. So he's going to drive to those rules, and I don't blame him for that. And if they are enabling him to keep his nose ahead in the championship, then that's what they're doing. But
well,
if
Chad,
we want, but if we
let's
don't
look.
want that to happen, then something needs to
Yeah, I agree
happen.
with you, and I think we have to be prepared for the refereeing to come into play a little bit more, even though we don't want to. And I have this weird feeling that we're going to go to Abu Dhabi again 3 years after the scene of the crime, if you will, and then kind of go back and rehash something because it's become very evident this weekend. I mean, I have to admit it. I was a little bit disappointed to see how Max was racing because you and I have had this debate on whether Max, is the top five all time GOAT, if you will, or not. And we've had pretty heated debates, and I've defended him. I felt at times, and I never thought that I would see this day come in. And what is pretty evident now is that if things go as they should on paper, he is probably going to lose the championship. And I think there's an engine penalty coming as well, right? So there's
Ah,
that
yeah,
in the
yeah,
works
yeah.
too. So what I saw this past weekend, and really Austin to a certain extent, was just reeking of desperation. And it was to the point where he was doing exactly what you said, which is to drive the other driver off just enough to where you avoid a race ban. But you can see from his body language, from his words, from everything that he says and the way he reacts that he is hell bent on trying to run the clock out. That's what this is all about.
It is. That is it.
And
And
then
it's a,
so what do you do there? What do you do there if you're the FIA? I mean, are you going to actually intervene? And look, we've been on Lando's case for being too soft. I think we also need to be on Max's case for being just aggressive to the point of like, I'm sorry, it's a little bit of loser behavior, to be honest. And I've defended Max in the past. I didn't like what I see. And other drivers are racing too, and they're sometimes over the line, but it's not quite this way. It's just,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah. I agree. And I know that a lot of you in the comments will say, oh, but Max is hyper competitive, and he
I mean,
he
hyper
wouldn't be the
competitive doesn't
driver.
mean,
He,
yeah.
correct, that he wouldn't be the driver that he is if he wasn't competitive like that. But my argument to that comment would be that every other driver on the grid, apart from Lance Stroll, is just as competitive. They want to win races
Right.
too. They're just not prepared to
It's
to
future.
drive their competitor off the track to achieve those aims. And we know that it's
Well,
possible to win championships without doing that. We
hyper
know it.
competitive doesn't mean you draw the line. A hyper competitive could also then mean that you go and deflate the your opponent's tires or something like that's not how that works, right? You can't do that.
Correct.
And I have to be honest, more
Correct. Where do you
worse than
draw the
that
line?
is what Christian Horner did, which is just weak, man. I have so had it with the
Okay.
Red Bull leadership, like between him and Marco, get them all out of here. Like Christian Horner, last week he was out there. Oh my God, the refereeing was part of it, blah blah blah. This week he decides to put on sort of refereeing 101 class coming out with telemetry. By the way, Shez, you should be more upset about that than me too. Like he's doing your thing there.
Yeah, well, yes, that's true. But I don't think I would ever get hired to be Red Bull's representative. I have to say, I respect the hell out of Christian Horner for doing that
No
because
one's believing them though. No one's the difference
doesn't
between him.
matter. It
No,
doesn't
but no
matter.
one.
Look,
I tell you what, Christian Horner has such a credibility problem now that anyone like look, we talked about McLaren doing this last week in the appeal, and it perfectly worked out fine. Like they were completely denied on there, but it kept everything in the news stream.
but that was clever.
Yeah, but Christian
It,
Horner doing the same thing will not have the effect, Shez. That's what I'm saying.
mate,
It's
it
not going to
doesn't
have the same
matter,
thing.
man. It doesn't matter because look, for me, I look back at 2021. And I look at how Mercedes handled a lot of the controversy, and they were so backseat about it. They were so like, we're not going to fight this because we can overcome them by our performance, by being fairer, by being, a complainant, not wanting to complain to the FIA. And it bit them in the butt because when it came down to it, Red Bull were just more ruthless and it won them the title in the end. And I feel like McLaren have trod that line much better than Mercedes did in 2021. Zach Brown in the aftermath of Mexico coming out and saying, nah, that 20-second penalty
Not
wasn't
enough.
enough.
Yeah.
It probably
Yeah.
should have been harsher.
Yeah.
And the fact that his team decided to go for such a convoluted right of review in Austin to try and get that decision turned around. That's something that Mercedes never bothered to do. Yes, they did that in Brazil to try and get the stewards to even look at the possibility of a penalty, but it was so half-hearted. All of it was just half-hearted. I respect Christian Horner for going out to bat for his driver. I don't respect his driver for doing the thing that he needed defending, but I respect Horner for going out
No, I
there
don't. I
and,
don't
and coming
respect.
out for it.
I
Like
don't
I love
respect.
it.
No, I don't respect him because, I mean, he has just at this point sold his soul, right? And I don't respect him for a myriad of decisions. This is just one of this, by the way, one of them keeping Checo, but this it reeks of desperation in a way that they have no other solution right now. I mean, this is the guy who told Toto Wolff to change his car, and he can't do that now. So he is out there doing this, and I think it looks very unbecoming, very futile, very petty, which is fine as a controversy.
Doesn't matter.
I have more sympathy for the driver who has to be in the heat of the moment versus the team principal who just says garbage all of the time. Like really, he's just garbage. And between him and Marco, again, you can get those two out of my life. I wouldn't have
Mate,
an issue.
I'll tell you what, mate. Like, if I do something ridiculously bad on a go-karting track, I definitely want Christian Horner in my corner because look, ultimately, it doesn't matter what you've done. You could literally like jump out of your car and smack the other guy in the face, and Christian Horner would be like, no, 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 he put his face there. It's
Yeah.
not Max's fault.
Yeah, no, I,
Mate, I love it.
I don't
I
have,
love it.
I have no time for that. I don't want to, but the reality is, I think what McLaren are doing now is very smart because not just Zach, but even Andrea Stella came out and said, look, that Max cost Lando a race win, and I think you can argue that to be the case because
Yeah, yeah,
he
yeah,
was
yeah. But
as great as Carlos was. The Ferraris were just a step below McLaren on the hard tire,
oh, only on the
really
hard
in his
tires,
hand.
right? Yeah.
Only on the hard tires, and maybe even on the mediums. I mean, it kind of again, if Lando was closer, things could have been a lot more different, right? Because he had lost so much time, right, behind Max, even after the penalty. It was, I mean, and look at it this way: Lando could have probably not even gotten second place had Max not decided to pit when he did, because that was Max wasn't going to give up the position to
Yeah,
track
yeah.
everything. So.
I think it was a bit
Um,
give. I think it was a bit give and take whether Lando would have actually overcome Sainz by the end of the race, come like whatever happened. But we would have had a potential fight on our hands.
yeah.
Um,
And I think
I
this is where you
yeah,
have to come back to Max driving negatively, right? I wouldn't call him a negative driver, but this is negative driving that we're seeing now, which is
but
maybe
that's all he's
an
got at
exception.
his disposal,
Yeah, but I
ultimately,
mean,
isn't it?
but that's not, I mean, if you're gonna, again, we're talking about racing, right? It's such a great season. If you get beat, you get beat. I mean, that's what this is. And ultimately, no one's gonna think less of Max because the Red Bull clearly looked like the weaker car. I mean, there is a 1 second gap between Max and his teammate on a consistent basis. Like, so no one in the right mind would be and Red Bull are going to be P3 now. That's a given. They're not gonna make it back into either of the two sort of top places.
Oh man,
So
I'm still yeah. I mean, the conversation that happens if Max Verstappen wins the title and Red Bull come third in the constructors, I don't think I'm quite ready for. But we're probably going to have that conversation at the end of the season.
we will,
Uh,
we will.
as usual, if you like what we're doing here, please like. If you haven't, please subscribe. Please leave us a comment. I think I know what a lot of the comments are going to be here, but just go easy on us a little bit if you can. Or don't, whatever. We'll read all of them and we'll respond to as many as we possibly can. And we will see you guys in the next one.
Vamos, Carlos.